Now we'll understand about visual cortex. Visual cortex is not a single uniform area, okay? It is a hierarchy of specialized regions, each handling different aspects of visual information. And the labels which we have given to these visual areas are V1, V2, V3, V4, and V5. And remember, there is a sequential visual processing happening in these areas. Like first, visual information is received in V1. There's a further processing in V2. Further later, the information is further processed in V4, V3, V4, and V5. So there is a sequential processing of information which happens in the occipital cortex. Okay. First, little bit we'll understand about the V1 area. Okay. So V1 area, it is a first cortical station for vision, meaning all the information whatever is received from the via the visual pathway from the lateral geniculate body first is relayed in the V1 area, okay, and this is located in the occipital lobe along the calcareous sulcus, and this area's main function is to process the basic visual information whatever is received from the lateral geniculate body. And remember, what is the basic processing which is happening here is your V1 area will be able to detect the edges, the orientation, the contrast of the objects you're seeing, the light intensity, all this will be processed in V1 area. And also it has a retinotopic map, meaning there's a point to point mapping of visual field in V1 area. Okay, so remember, first area in the occipital lobe to receive all the visual information is V1. So from V1, the information will be passed on to V2 area. So what happens in V2 area? The further processing happens. Like here, the what is the color of the object, what is how far it is, the depth and the contours of the objects, whatever you're seeing, no, all that will be assessed in V2 area. And this will mainly for example, see, one your friend is standing, okay, but when the information when it was received in V1 area, what happens is the whole background along with the person who is standing, everything will be processed in V1 area. Now in V2, what happens is the person whom you want to see will be separated from the background. Okay, so that kind of further refinement happens in V2 area. So the object which you want to focus on, now that becomes more and more clearer because of the processing which is happening in V2 area. Then V3 area, remember, this is since it is in between, can you understand? It's exactly in the between V1 to V5. This is not very clearly defined, okay, compared to other areas. And this actually the main function of V3 area is to process the dynamic movements, meaning for example, if an object is moving, okay, if for example if a car is moving, you want to identify what is the shape of the car or what is the model of the car, okay, so that kind of information processing when an object is in motion is actually processed in V3 areas. Okay, so this will help in depth and spatial organization when an object is in motion. Okay, so this almost kind of like integrating the functioning of V1 to V5. This whole range of visual cortical areas. No, the whole processing is okay. Next, we move on to V4. V4 is nothing but it is specialized for color and form recognition, meaning the color vision or a color processing happens in V4. Remember that, okay? So this is the main area which will help us in color perception. So any damage when it happens in the V4 area, remember we call it as cerebral achromatopsia. Okay, so the detailing of all the objects and what is the color of that is all processed in V4. V5 is also called MTA. MTA meaning middle temporal area, and this is mainly specialized for motion detection. Remember, this will detect the direction and the speed of the moving object. Okay, so this is mainly the motion analyzer. So now what you need to understand here is that there are different areas V1 to V5. There is a sequential processing of information when the information is passed from V1 to V5 areas. Okay, but if you see in a like a bigger picture, how exactly the pathway will the information is processed. Okay, I think individually you know what is the function, right? V1 will help in initial processing. Clear? So the V2 will mainly help in further refining of information like the color, depth, and contours. Like not like color meaning not exactly the color perception, maybe the shades of gray, the intensity of the colors, all that will be slightly processed in V2, like mainly the refinement happens. V3 will help when an object is in moving. Okay, you will be able to identify the shape of the object. Such things happens in V3. V4 is mainly for color perception. V5 is mainly for identifying the motion detection. Okay, like what is the direction of the object, the what is the direction with the object is moving, at what speed is it moving, all that will be analyzed in V5. Clear? Now the question here is, when the initial processing, when it is happening in V1 area, there is initial processing of visual information. When it happens, remember, the information will split, or the processing will split into two major pathways, and usually we call them as where pathway and what pathway. Where pathway is called a dorsal stream. Okay, so these are all the different terms they use in different books. Okay, but the what information we need to understand here is, once the in V1, when the initial processing of visual information is happening, after that, if the information will be sent to V1, V2, V3, V5, and it goes to parietal lobe. So remember, in a sequential order, from V1, information will pass on to V2, V3, V5, and then parietal lobe. Okay, and this is called where pathway, and mainly this pathway will process the location and motion of an object, meaning where is the object in the space. So that is a spatial relationship, right? Where is the object in the space? Now, if I have to give an example, remember, a ball is thrown at you, okay? There's suddenly a football is thrown at you suddenly. Now, you need to understand how far is the object from you, meaning like where exactly is the ball which is coming towards you. Clear? So that your that processing that is required for the understanding the what do you call the location or the spatial relationship of the ball in the space is actually processed via this pathway. That is why this pathway is called where pathway. Clear? So remember, this pathway is also sometimes referred to as how pathway, because now then you will start thinking like, how should I act? For example, if suddenly a ball comes to you, you should move away from its path, right? So you need to run, you need to just step away from the from getting hit. So that is why, like, your brain has to suddenly process what you need to do. So that's why where pathway or how pathway. So how should I act is this pathway. Sometimes, like, in a easier way to put it, they usually refer to this as how pathway or where pathway. So that kind of information is processed in from V1, initial processing happens, then the further refinement happens in V2, V3, V5, and parietal lobe it goes. Okay. Next, another pathway is what pathway. That is now information from V1 moves to V2, then to V4, and then to temporal lobe. Clear? This pathway is like what pathway, meaning what are you looking at? For example, if a person is standing in front of you, first your V1 will understand that, okay, there is some person standing. So what is the, like, you have to first identify it's a person, right, standing. That kind of initial processing and all happens in V2, sorry, V1. Then further refinement in V2, then V4, and finally it goes to temporal lobe. This is where you'll identify what is the color, what is the shape, what is the face. You give a name to the face now, and or what objects are there in the field, right? And remember, as a whole, the whole information will be sent to your eyes. So then you need to separate based on its depth, and also based on the what do you call that, you need to like separate the object which you need to focus from its background. Okay, so all that happens in your this what pathway. Clear? So that for that you need your temporal lobe for this processing to happen. So this is the kind of visual processing which happens in the visual cortex in the areas V1, V2, V3, V4, and V5. These are areas next to next, okay, placed very close to each other in the visual cortex, that is your occipital lobe. Clear? And there is usually there is a hierarchical processing of information. Okay, from V1 it goes to V2, V3, V4, and V5 to certain extent. And you know, the further refinement how we understood is like initial processing always happens in V1. Your all the information which comes via the optic pathway relays in lateral geniculate body. From lateral geniculate body, the initially it is relayed in V1, where the initial process